Right. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Laura Johnson-Morris. I'm your room host. Just a housekeeping item: to open closed captioning, click on the CC live transcript button at the bottom of the Zoom room. And please use the chat pod to talk amongst yourselves, post questions to the presenters, let us know where you're joining us from. I will repost this, but we have a quick poll link that you can fill out as we get started. And so now please join us in welcoming today's presenters. Corinne, over to you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining the session. Today, we are going to talk about competency-based education and the importance of having performance-based assessment at the center of the learning process for students in an online and in-class setting. The ultimate goal is to make learning engaging, effective, and efficient for everyone. You get what you assess will be discussed among experts. Martin Basiri is a co-founder at Apply Board. Their mission is to make education accessible to all. It is an online platform to help students around the globe to study abroad. Darcy Norman is an associate director of learning technology and design at the University of Calgary. His work enables evidence-based integration of learning technologies to support pedagogical designs across disciplines. And David Wong is a professor in electrical and computer engineering and the first-year student advisor at the University of Waterloo. He has been implementing competency-based education practices. And myself, Karen Maret, I am a doctorate at Indiana University in the field of instruction system technology. I'm also the co-founder of an emerging new technology that facilitates competency-based assessment named Kritik. Next slide, Armin. As you know, there is a chat, a form that you can fill up to know who you are. And as you know, competency-based education provides numerous values. It prepares students to be critical thinkers and apply their knowledge to real-world context that prepare them for their future. There is no prescribed way to do competency-based education, but there is common features. First, as you can see at the top left, institution design curriculum around competencies. Then faculty members assist students to advance upon learning toward mastery of a topic or a subject. And students take ownership in their learning. And employers now can communicate the standard required to align the learning objective with learning outcome. So we can see all the value from different perspectives and what shift needs to happen to allow for competency-based education. We need a collaborative effort among those stakeholders. Institutions, faculty, students, and employers need to work together to enable the adoption of a learning-centered approach to ensure that all students are supported based on their personal abilities and leave their course prepared and ready to succeed in their work after graduation. By working together, we can fully benefit from competency-based education. Through this collaboration, the benefits extend far beyond the classroom. So first, there's a fostering of culture of learning, and students will develop the competency needed to succeed in their career. Second, empowering performance-based assessment, professor will save time grading. And third, including employers and technology, the employability of students will increase. So there is some why institutions move toward personalized competency based education. And you can see here I add personalized as this is a new way of doing competency-based learning because it is a more efficient and effective way for students to engage in the real-world experience necessary for today's market that's personalized to them. And why is important to adopt this method of teaching and learning? There is three main reasons in the literature that we found. Is one, to improve learning outcome. Second, respond to the workforce need. And third, become part of a broader initiative of educational motivation. And so when personalized competency-based education is adopted efficiently and effectively, students engage in their learning with real-world experiences necessary in today's market. These occur to have like a curriculum that include the learning objectives that represent the competency objectives needed in the workforce. And one of the benefits of competency-based learning is that all students can learn at their own pace. In order to do this, we need to create an environment that stimulates all levels of students sitting in the same classroom. This graph represents the variety of learners moving toward mastery of a subject or topic. In this case, we have the fast learner in green, and then the ideal learning path in blue at the middle, and learners who are progressing slower in red. And here you can see that all students are progressing at their own pace toward expertise. For this to happen, this is critical that the curriculum is designed to take into consideration all learning speeds and ability of students. This is why personalized is often referenced before competency-based learning to ensure that the system of learning is personalized to each student. But how can we achieve that? Armin is going to give you the next slide. It is important to have like a performance-based assessment at the center of the learning process to make learning engaging, effective, efficient for everyone. And nowadays, we have access to technology and software that help instructors apply performance-based assessment. Algorithm can be used within the software to get metrics on the progress made through self-assessment and peer assessment. So to illustrate, you can see a few images on the slide. Kritik incorporates calibration on the left with peer feedback process based on competency and performance. Our algorithm help an educator to one, identify the prior knowledge of students, and two, group students based on their level of knowledge. The ability to calibrate students' level of knowledge empower educators to develop course materials that reduce the gap of learning for all. It means that a student with a low score should receive additional material to relearn prior knowledge necessary for the level of the course. The result from the calibration can be used to one, group student with the same or two different level of knowledge. So let me explain a little bit more here. The advantage to group students within the same level is that students who have not met the learning objective will be provided extra support to progress toward mastery. And students who have demonstrated mastery will have the opportunity to deepen their knowledge in other contexts. And the other way is to do the advantage to group students with different level is that novice students can learn from students who are further ahead. And however, this is very important that guidelines should be provided by the professor to assist novice students in submitting quality feedback to their peers. So in this environment, both the novice and more advanced students are stimulated and are able to deepen their learning in the same learning environment. One effective way to use personalized-based education is to incorporate self-assessment and peer assessment within the teaching and learning process. Most educators are familiar with the general review standard from Quality Matter, which outline clearly how to develop the quality course. As the organization of Quality Matter states, students learn more frequently when given frequent feedback from instructor, assessments that have been built into them, and from other students. But how can I guide students to provide quality evaluation? So we came up with the model TEACH. The TEACH model is a framework based on the competency-based education and SMART goal principles that outline clearly what strong feedback looks like. Feedback should be given on time with explicit guidance, explicit on what, where, and how students can improve. The comment need to be appropriate for the level of the student, and the rubrics is essential to guide students towards C, competency, by providing their peers with helpful direction, H, and that are motivational and critical. Not only does the TEACH model guide students to provide quality feedback, it also emphasizes the development of soft skills necessary to succeed in a workplace. Overall, with competency-based education, all students feel successful when given the opportunity to achieve competencies that are aligned with their level. And that brings us today to the discussion panel. So Martin, you are an expert in recruiting international students for university. Yeah, can you display the question?
Yes.
So yeah, what are your view on competency-based assessment for the administration process?
Yes, thank you, Karen. As you said, Apply Board, what we do, we help international students from all over the world to come to universities in Canada, United States, US, like a UK and Australia, through our system. So we are exposed to every single university admission and admission criteria, and we could see what works, what doesn't work. One of the biggest problem in the admission system today, especially when it comes to broader than your local high schools, for example, or local university where you know about them, is how to look at everyone from same lens and from the equity point of view. Like, for example, like high schools in India or in Iran or the other states that where you are from, you could see a 4.0, but 4.0 in one high school might be equivalent to like 3.0 from another school. So it's completely something that you can't like compare everyone with the same lens. But unfortunately, that being used on one of the most important part of a student's life. What I'm very, very excited about is more and more universities are getting to competency-based education, and their outcome would be by the success of their alumni. And the success of alumni is how competent they are in different fields. So when you work backward for universities to do that job well, there is no argument that it won't take long till competency-based assessment become part of the admission for these universities. And that's one of the reasons I'm very excited for this field, especially for what Kritik does, is because sooner than later that come to the center of the admission decision making. As today, their like GPA is playing that most important role. I think that's gonna change in this decade, and it's very, very exciting, and it brings the equity up.
Darcy, your role is to enable like evidence-based integration of learning technologies to support pedagogical design across discipline. So how do you see your view on competency-based, like what Martin say? Can you build on like how it is possible to do that in universities?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the amazing things about universities is they are hubs of innovation around pedagogy, of ways of teaching. And at our university, as I'm sure at all of yours as well, our programs and curriculums are largely competency-based, the things that you want students to learn, the types of things you want them to be able to do. And so we've got a number of things at our institution where we're actually looking at really refocusing our courses from being sort of content-centric to really focusing on these competencies. And it enables some things. So we've got some opportunities. And one of the major buckets of opportunities is what we call disaggregating and modularizing. You take a 4-year program, which can be a big commitment for students. And it's hard to sort of describe what that program does. But if you take that and break it down into a number of certificates. We have this in our Workload School of Education, where a 4-year graduate degree can be a lot for especially a teacher who's working to also take on, but they could maybe do a series of 1-year certificates. And that also gives them the way of picking what they want the focus of each of the certificates to be, and that's around competencies. They might take a certificate on academic leadership, on pedagogical design, on course design, on assessment, and they can stack these certificates together to form a larger credential. And so it gives some flexibility on the pathways there. We also do a lot of work on micro-credentials, badges, and that's a way of describing competencies essentially, and having people, not just students, because we use them across the institution, demonstrate proficiency at these various competencies. At our institution, we've had a badges platform for over 6 years now, and we've offered, I think it's over 120 different badges of different scales, and it's everywhere from our computer science graduate students needing to show that they can log into a server and do a thing, so they get a badge, so they have access to the labs, all the way up to larger badges that are, someone's gone through a course design program and they've done a capstone project, and they've taught a thing, and they've developed that. All of these competencies are demonstrated in the same system. And what that lets people do is create these interesting cross-career, cross-curricular connections that are hard to do when we look at our programs and our academic activities as these big monoliths. We're modularizing this. We've got a lot of work on adapting programs. So at our institution, again, as I'm sure as at all of yours, we have an institutional initiative from our provost office called the Program Innovation Hub. And it's looking at how do we redesign existing programs to integrate things like work integrated learning and indigenous ways of knowing, and all of these things that we need to do that are hard to do when you look at programs from a content-centric way. But if you're looking at them from a competency-based way, all of a sudden there's opportunities to do this. Adaptable course design. So we can use our competencies and learning outcomes to design and implement these courses. This provides an opportunity, and once we've got the courses designed around these competencies and outcomes, we can use the tools to connect those competencies with the content, with the assessment, and sort of doing some interesting things, as Karen kind of talked about with the algorithms in Kritik. The learning management systems have similar things as well, and we can sort of automate a lot of these things that make them possible at scale of a lot of larger courses. They come with a bunch of challenges though, right? So one of them is awareness. A lot of instructors are doing competencies and outcomes without really being aware that that's what they're doing. And so making sure that they're aware of sort of the vocabulary around it, the concepts, and why it's important to focus on these things, and what tools and institutional processes are available to help support their work. Another challenge is data entry. When you're designing a course around competencies, there's a lot of assigning this competency in this chain of competencies to each piece of content and assessment and activities in a course. And that's a very labor-intensive process. So the challenge is finding ways to make it more manageable for people going through the course design and implementation stage. And then adapting assessment strategies to get away from that focus on pure content, but assessing skills and assessing the proficiency on these various types of things. And again, that disaggregating and modularizing even within the course. How can you look at assessment differently when you're not just going to be looking at content? Again, something higher ed we've been doing for forever, but it's making the implicit explicit. And then once we do that, we can connect it with software and algorithms and other tools to really make it more sustainable. And that's, I think, a huge opportunity for this stuff.
Thank you, Darcy. And David, you are an instructor, and you have been implementing different teaching and assessment methodology that Darcy is talking about in various courses. What do you see in competency-based learning that traditional teaching method don't achieve?
Thank you very much. So I've actually been on sort of both sides of the table. I've been in industry, but I'm also the teaching quality coordinator, first-year academic advisor. So I see both sides, and from the industry point of view and the academia point of view, sometimes the needs don't match. As in academia, the traditional way of assessment is exams, quizzes, and I was sitting down with some of my kids over Thanksgiving dinner, and they were actually joking about how they would cram for an exam, and then by the end of it, they would like literally regurgitate and forget. And I'm just sitting there as a professor going, oh my goodness, my kids didn't learn anything from university. So like never in real life, when they get into the workplace, will they ever be kind of assessed in this kind of a manner, sit down for 2.5 hours, throw out everything that you know, and then forget about it. Really, education from the industry point of view should be competency-based. They need to be able to do. What I tell my first-year students quite often, they're worried about marks and how to study for exams. But I tell them, like most employers, if not all, almost never look at the results of traditional assessment. Your marks don't matter really after you graduate. They look at your experience. They look at what you've done. So everything after you get into the workplace is competency-based. So why aren't we doing it that way in the classroom? So I really think that competency-based education is so important to start to incorporate more in our universities. Competency always trumps marks. Now, in terms of peer assessment, for example, when you ask employers what are the sort of the most important characteristics they want to see in a prospective employee, the students think that it's going to be technical skills, whereas the employers typically say communication and teamwork. And in particular for peer assessment, that becomes very important. The communication, I'm just looking at the TEACH acronym you had, appropriate comments, constructive, helpful. The students learn in peer assessment how to do that. And if they can take that into the workplace, that's amazing. And, how to work in a team and how to give constructive criticism, those are so important. So I really think that there's a lot of disadvantages in the way we traditionally teach, and I really support any move towards competency-based education that we can make.
Nice, and which leads to my next question. What is a student's perception when it comes to peer grading fairness as opposed to traditional grading by instructors?
So yeah, that's always a question that's asked. I had to actually prepare a video for the students to kind of explain to them. And actually that video I've actually shown professors, because professors have the same worry that, peer assessment, they're going to, give everyone good marks, or they may be nasty and give everyone low marks. And, is it going to be fair? Because ultimately that's what the students are most concerned about. We received at University of Waterloo funding from the government of Ontario, eCampus Ontario, to look at this, and we've conducted a number of polls. And I have to say the polls with regard to fairness, with regard to just the platform of peer assessment in general, has been overwhelmingly positive. I rarely see student surveys go out where 70 to 80% of the responses love what's happening. And so what happens and I'm just going to mention Kritik because it has a grading power. So how you grade, how well you grade actually is part of your marks. And so it really encourages the student to grade fairly, because if they give poor evaluations, they actually do not get as good a mark. So the students learn they have to grade fairly and do the best that they can. Each student actually gets 5 assessments, and the research shows that if you have 5 assessments, the student actually gets a mark that's very close to what a TA or instructor would give anyways. And they get this in a very, like the T in TEACH was timely. They get 5 feedbacks on their work within 3 or 4 days. And it's such a fair process. Anyone who's an instructor will realize you're always getting people disputing about marks. We're traditionally getting about less than 1% dispute about assigned marks through the peer assessment. So everything seems to show that it's very, very fair, and the students love it. And as an instructor, I'm really happy that I don't have to go back and regrade stuff over and over and over again. Oops, sorry, Corinne, I think your microphone is off.
Oh, so yeah, sorry. So there's a question in the chat. So Mandy is asking if we are using a rubrics or a checklist. So we are using rubrics to guide a student. I don't know if you want to say a few words about it.
Yeah, so that there's rubrics, but then once they put on a rubric, they have to comment, they have to explain why they gave that rubric. And then what I also do is they have to give at least one of the things on the rubric has to be a suggestion on how to improve the submission. So we let the students know that it's not just a, pull the bar 4, 4, 3, 2, 1. They have to explain their mark.
Nice. And then, so, oops, I think, I think you just click it a lot.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what about some professors are using sometimes technology, and then is any concern using Kritik about for the workload of the instructors or TAs?
Some of it depends on how you implement it, but it's been my experience. I have 450 students. They have to submit, I think, 15 submissions. We get almost 4,000 written submissions. And every submission is marked 5 times. That's 20,000 pieces of evaluation that the student gets. Immediate feedback, basically. Just think about the number of TAs that you would need to actually do that. We only had 2 TAs, and the TAs basically just resolved disputes and went in and just did spot checks on the evaluations. It reduces, I would say it reduces the number of people, TAs that you need probably by a third. Sorry, to a third of what you would normally need. I could not have done that course without doing peer assessment. And in terms of the instructor workload, it's greatly reduced my workload as well. And I can focus on creating innovative discussion points, innovative questions. And so, yeah, so I can focus on the teaching rather than just the marking.
Nice. And then, so another, we are all here, to help student learning, and that's the ultimate goal of all universities. So now, do you think that students are really learn through peer assessment?
Yeah, I mean, you've heard the adage, the best way to learn is to teach, right? And we do factor their grading power into their overall grade. And so how well they mark is actually put into their grade. And it's quite interesting. I actually use this in a first-year course on engineering professionalism, but I also use it in a graduate level course, which was basically theorem proof. And it was actually fascinating how we could see the learning process based on how well they evaluated their fellow students. So we could see exactly how much they understood and what they didn't understand by looking at how they marked. And if you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, it's no surprise that that's what happened. And it's really quite fascinating. So in my first year class, there's a lot of engineering professionalism, involves a lot of communication. So they had to do a lot of written submissions. Well, what we did was we took the grading power from my course and we looked at their English course marks, totally different course. And it turned out the grading power in my course, in other words, their ability to evaluate, was strongly correlated to their English marks. And so, yeah, I think the peer assessment, not only do they learn through it, but it is a very accurate way of measuring assessment. Much better, in my opinion, than a 2-hour or 2.5-hour sit-down exam.
Thanks. And then now let's change the topic to something also very important, is the role of promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in education. So how, David, how did you see in your course Kritik making an impact in this area?
Well, in a specific example, I guess one of the things in terms of equity is it really allows those students who don't think well in a pressure situation to be able to participate. And they're assessed, there's no timelines, they're assessed fairly. It's not an exam situation, because what we find is that certain students, especially those with mental health issues, are really disadvantaged in the traditional teaching method. The other thing too is in my course, we have lots of discussions about engineering professionalism with respect to diversity, equity, inclusion. And by doing peer assessment, which is anonymous, students are very much allowed to express their views in a safe environment. And so I can pick very controversial topics, have them discuss it. And one of the topics I discussed, for example, is ethics. And I gave them an example of a company that needs to make money and their technology can be used in the pornography industry. So I get the students to talk about that. And there's a wide range of views and it's very hotly debated. But because it's all anonymous, it's all peer assessed, it's a very safe environment and people can feel free to express their actual opinions.
Nice. Darcy, do you want to add a few of your perspective in this question?
Yeah, I put a thing in chat. So Mendy asked about is it formative feedback versus sort of the summative feedback. And we're doing a pilot with Kritik right now, and one of the first things we heard from students is they're like, whoa, hang on, I enrolled in the course and I thought the instructor was going to be assessing me. I'm not trained in giving assessment. And so the actual direct assignment of grades. And so we reframed Kritik specifically as a peer feedback tool. So students are providing feedback to each other, and then using that to the document that's provided to the instructor for the form and TAs for the formal assessment and the grades. The other thing we saw right away was there's sort of two patterns of use where some instructors would teach the course normally and then drop in a peer feedback activity right at the end. And the students basically said, well, that's dumb. I didn't learn anything. Why would I do this thing? The other pattern was instructors who did a constant practice of peer feedback throughout the whole semester. So they start with something small and low risk at the beginning, and then they started doing multiple things through the semester. When the students developed that practice of feedback, and like David was saying, learning how to give and receive feedback and actually integrating it into their assignments, they had a profoundly powerful learning experience as a result of that. So it's how it's used, not just the tool itself.
Great. So next, Armin, this is the last question, and how far does competency-based learning impact employability and students' success in the work environment? So maybe Martin, you would like to have a few words?
That's an amazing question. We have about 1,400 employees all over the world, and as David said, like we never like ask employees or like candidates what was your GPA at the school. We always like looking at them at what experience they have, what are their attitude, how are they open to growth. There is something happening in the new, and I graduated like less than 7 years ago, so I'm included in that example that I'm going to tell you. The younger generation, like us, who we graduated recently from the school, there is a sense that we carry with ourselves out that we know so much. And we kind of underestimate the complexity of the work outside of the work sometimes. So one of the best way that we learn when we enter a work environment is we get feedback from other people. What we see a lot in the young graduates that they coming mostly in their first or second job is the recipient to their feedback is actually one of their major way of not allowing them to flourish, to really grow, because they take feedback too personal. And they always think like any feedback means they're not doing their work well. What I'm very hopeful that this behavioral change, as Darcy also mentioned, where the students learn how to give feedback and receive feedback, that make them better equipped when they enter in their work to have their recipient mentality, and they go about it with like an open mindset, because this way they can learn the experience very, very faster and they can be more successful. And you see like more of like a top companies, mostly they go for senior workers, right? They're working for like people who at least have 5 years of experience. One of the main reasons when you sit down and you talk to their HR is that one. They're like, students that coming out of a school, is kind of hard to work with them, giving them feedback and things. I think some tools like Kritik and generally speaking, the peer assessment and peer feedback, giving feedback and receiving feedback, make them more comfortable and take some of these barriers from their younghood up to the age of 22, 24 at the school, and their adulthood at the work environment. This can integrate better together, which lead to their success.
And then David or Darcy, there's a do you could you expand a little bit about like how can peer feedback can be used to create assignment? Do you use for final final exam or throughout, or like what's the best method? I think one Monday said, can you use it for final?
So I actually polled the students whether or not they would prefer peer assessment versus a final exam. So obviously they say they prefer peer assessment, but they also said that because they could see that the peer assessment was giving them a fair assessment of their marks. And that includes people who aren't doing very well. So you have to understand, you know, people who aren't doing well, they aren't complaining because they are seeing what their peers are submitting. And if they're honest with themselves, they can see that they're not really producing work that's up to snuff. So I would like to, unfortunately, in our department, we have a 50% final rule, and I'm trying to get that changed because, especially, you know, I had mentioned that there's a huge correlation between the grading power and even marks they get in another course. I think there's more and more evidence that, you know, a very good way of assessing is to see how they peer assess. And in my grad course, for example, I think I probably could have nailed down the marks of the students within 2 or 3 assignments, what they would get in the final, because we could see how they were assessing. So it's a huge tool. And I concur with everything that Martin said about you know, the why competency-based education is so important in the workplace. That ability to give and take criticism, that I see that grow over the course of my terms, and that's so important when they get into the workplace.
Yes, and Darcy, there were like a question in the chat. So everyone can feel free to turn on their camera and then ask the question if you at any time. There is one question that someone mentioned about the workload, and then Darcy, can you expand about like with competency-based learning, there is a shift in the workload.
Yeah, I mean, so what we've seen, like I mentioned, we're doing a pilot with Kritik this semester. So we have several instructors using it to try it out. What we're seeing is their workload may not be reduced, but they're doing different things. And so the example I put in the chat, imagine you've got 300 students and they're doing, you know, a term paper over a few versions in the semester. Instead of the instructor and the TAs providing direct feedback on every revision of every term paper, so it could be 300, 600, 900 documents they're reviewing, they're maybe doing some examples. They're working with the students to discuss what is good feedback, sort of supporting that process, and then letting the students kind of organically provide feedback to each other and then sort of adapting the course afterwards. So the workload may not be less for the instructors and the TAs, but they're focusing on different things and maybe developing more, you know, more development within the students on the practice of feedback, which I think is probably a bigger takeaway than necessarily the specific content of the course.
Nice. And then the last question in the chat was, the learning outcome with peer assessment is as good as use of TAs, of instructors. So there is, I think, this question, and also there is like another question above, which is also related to learning outcome. So do you find that existing course learning outcomes are not written appropriately to be used in competency-based learning class? So someone can maybe David or Darcy can talk about the learning outcomes and how do you think differently now in order to shape your course with a real world experience for students, and how do you make them? Yeah,
I can maybe speak on the learning outcomes and as well as how you develop your course. So there is a little bit of more work on the front end to modify your course. But, you know, for example, the questions you ask may need to be shorter because the students now not only is put in an assignment, but they need to mark as well. So you can't just take your traditional course, just throw all the questions into Kritik. You have to think a little bit more carefully. But in terms of learning outcomes, one of the things about learning outcomes, you're always looking at the threshold concepts. There's certain concepts in a course that the students must know before they go to the next level. And as opposed to just a whole bunch of topics and you just kind of check off, I'll cover this topic, cover this topic, cover this topic. Now you can really focus on learning outcomes and create peer assessment to guide the learning process so that they actually capture and can understand the threshold concepts, and then they go to the next level. I just find with traditional teaching methods, it does often just become a checklist of things, and you don't really get a good feel for how well they understand before they move on to the next subject. With peer assessment, they get so much feedback. The student really gets a sense of, do they actually understand? Especially sometimes when they mark and they don't know where to start marking, they really understand that, yeah, Bloom's taxonomy says that you need higher level cognitive thinking to be able to mark, and they really need to work on understanding the topic more. So I think you do have to be careful. You do have to take another look at your learning outcomes. You have to look at your content, and you have to look at what questions you're asking and what questions you're assigning. So there is a little bit more work there.
Nice. And then maybe just to the final question for Darcy is, what do you think are the top driver for competency-based education adoption in your university, for sure, for now?
Yeah, I think it's kind of that awareness thing. And what David was just talking about, sort of the Bloom's taxonomy, what is an outcome, what are learning outcomes and competencies? It's that awareness piece. A lot of times, especially for people who like inherit a course that's previously taught, everything is that checklist: understand, they will know, they will regurgitate. And it's that doing that extra work to, well, what are the actual things that you want to describe in the course? What are you wanting people to be able to do? And it's almost like competencies as verbs instead of nouns. And it's that subtle reframing of how you're approaching the course. And what we see is the most powerful courses at our institution, and again, probably at all of yours as well, are the cases where the instructors have really taken that to heart, and their competencies are verbs, not nouns. And that makes a huge shift because they're caring more about what can students do, and it's shifting, implicitly up that Bloom's taxonomy, which is, Bloom's is a little problematic anyway. It oversimplifies a bunch of things, but it is an interesting way of looking at this. Yeah, so I think that awareness thing really is the biggest part. Once that's in place, it unlocks a bunch of other things, like using tools to automate parts of it and using software to algorithmically do stuff. That can't happen unless you have good understanding and shared understanding of what competencies and outcomes are.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was a very good conclusion. And I would like to share a few resources or to go to Kritik. Armin, if you can go to the next slide. Okay, great. And so there's a few links that I put for you. So you can, we have a team who, and I'm also a researcher at Indiana University, and I collaborate with a few professors in various universities in North America. So feel free to look at our professor stories, resources, and if you are doing currently any research to enhance education, feel free to email me at research@kritik.io, and I will be very happy to look at your hypothesis and see if there's anything we can do together. Even if there is something that Kritik do not have at the moment, it's possible that we can just maybe modify the roadmap as everything that has been built at Kritik based on what the professor wants. And this is a tool for you to unlock the potential to make sure that students can learn and become expert and get a job as soon as you get graduated. Next slide, we have a coupon that you can as a gift for you. So feel free to take your phone and then scan this coupon. Is only valid for the URL is kritik.io/free course, as you can see in the bottom. But if you have a phone or a screenshot, this code is only valid for EDUCAUSE. And there is a value of $3,000, and then there's a limitation of like student enrolled in the class. But yeah, thank you so much everyone for your participation. Thank you for your question. Thank you, David and Darcy and Martin, for your great participation.
Great.
think,
And
yeah.
yeah, on behalf of us at EDUCAUSE, thank you as well, Karen and Darcy, David, and Martin for your time today. Thanks everyone for joining us, for your great questions and engagement. We have a short break now until the next set of sessions, so feel free to browse the agenda or connect with others online. Have a great day.